Wasabi guys, welcome back to another Commander video. As always, if you appreciate these, please hit the subscribe button, it means a lot. In no particular order, these are my 10 favorite keyword abilities. All within the context of playing a Commander game, I think that these have been the most satisfying abilities for me. And if you're someone who's looking to have a little bit more fun and you haven't tried any of these, you should probably do yourself that favor. I think all of them are pretty well designed. I didn't want to include anything that was super busted, because again, a lot of the fun for me in Commander is when things are balanced, but interesting. That's really what I look for in cards, and that's what I look for in abilities. So the first one is going to be Constellation all the way back in Theros. We received newer ones in Theros Beyond Death, but I like with this ability, we want something that's powerful that's going to make playing this specific permanent type more on the level of artifacts, because artifacts have been given a ton of support. How it generally works is that whenever the card with Constellation or another enchantment enters the battlefield, you get a triggered ability. And these are some of my favorite abilities because of just how rare they are. There isn't an oversaturation of Constellation. I feel like we have just the right amount of good stuff in each color for Constellation. With the exception of maybe red, you don't have a lot of enchantment support in red to begin with. It's a great ability for Commander because we have a ton of 5-color Commander options that love enchantments, so you can fit in all the Constellation cards you want to. You can have great Constellation engines. You have great punishing abilities off of those triggers. It really helps you if you want to make enchantments a focus of your strategy to do exactly that. The next ability that I love is actually a relatively newer one, Ward. This goes back to last year's Strixhaven set. Ward is essentially the newer way for Wizards of the Coast to include protection or hexproof and actually make it more interactive. Whereas those previous keywords just outright prevent your opponents from doing anything, Ward says you could do this, but you have to pay a significant cost. It's not always mana either. We do have things like Nine Fingers Keen, with a ward ability of pay 9 life, which most people are probably not going to want to do that unless they've already gained a ton of life. This is what I was talking about with balanced abilities that make the game more interesting. It adds another layer of interactivity, where players would normally just ignore things like protection. Oh, I guess I'm never going to deal with this card. Here you have to think about your decisions, because here it's not as black and white as you can target it or you can't. So it's not really as lazy as hexproof or protection. They're still great abilities, but with Ward, there is a little bit more activity in your brain, which I always appreciate when you give the players respect. There's a trade-off. There's a pro and a con to every type of interaction. The next one is an elemental-focused ability, and that is Evoke from Lorwyn. We've received plenty of Evoke cards when you consider that it's pretty much just an elemental ability, but again, it's one that forces you to think about the pros and the cons. Evoke is a keyword ability that allows you to pay an alternate cost of certain amount of mana. However, when that elemental is put into play, you have to sacrifice it, and it isn't always cheaper to pay that Evoke cost. Revulark is a great example of a creature that needs to leave in order to have an impact, so its Evoke cost in order to sacrifice it is going to be even more expensive than its original mana cost. It's a Commander classic ability too. We've had things like Muldrifter and Shriekmaw in the format forever, and I wish that we would have more of this, if not Evoke, maybe some spiritual successor, where you kind of get to the gist of what you want with a card, without needing the creature in question for board presence. If I want to just draw 2 cards, I'll draw 2 cards for 3 mana. It's basically a divination that lets me have a creature in the graveyard. The next ability that I love is probably the most busted ability in my 10 favorite. It is Cascade. I love how ridiculous it is, but it's also balanced by the randomness. You are not guaranteed to get exactly what you want. I know there are certain players, they build decks around Cascade knowing exactly what they can get. They can even storm off and make everyone else miserable, but I like the more casual side of the Cascade ability, where you're just in it to have fun, basically gambling. It's even more fun when you have cards like Maelstrom Wanderer, where you have multiple Cascade triggers. So if you need to recover late game, all you have to do is play something like that, Apex Devastator, and you can recover board presence. You can start playing more spells. This is one of those rare exceptions where a card doesn't really need you to think. It is rather autopilot, but there is a satisfaction to not knowing exactly what you're going to get. I've had some of the most fun experiences where we're just casually playing Cascade, and someone either ends up getting a whiff, getting an absolute dud like a Birds of Paradise late game, or they end up getting something like, I don't know, a Palinchron, recover some mana, continue their turn, and it totally turns the game around. Next we have Mutate, which is another relatively newer ability. I think that says a lot. I've been complaining about Wizards of the Coast lately, but it's only because I know what they're capable of. Product-wise, marketing-wise, not a big fan. Design-wise, experimenting with what players want. And the Commander product is usually really good at doing this because there are actual players involved in its production. So they like to test things out. They like to see, well, what could make the game a little bit more interesting? And we occasionally get really awesome abilities like Mutate. It's very similar to another ability we're going to talk about later. You have to think about what you want to create every single time you use a Mutate ability, which is very appealing to someone who doesn't like to play on autopilot. You get different triggers on these Mutate creatures whenever they mutate, so that's also something you need to pay attention to. They're not super easy decks. It's not the most complicated strategy, but it is pretty easy to mess up if you don't know what you're doing. It, in essence, reminds me of one of my favorite commanders of all time, the Mimeoplasm from Commander 2011. Because you can mutate with any other creature, it doesn't have to be a Mutate creature. You have so many possibilities of what you can create. You can have the most busted abilities on another really busted creature, still getting all the same abilities from the other creatures. It's another one of those where I would really like to see some more support. It's not just a Commander Precon ability. It was in the main Ikoria set, so if we ever return to Ikoria, I think it's one we'll probably see again. The next ability of mine that I really love is Myriad. And there really isn't that much Myriad support. It's not really a strategy that you build an entire deck around. It's really one that you use to abuse really good ETBs, really good legendary death triggers. Because if you give a legendary creature Myriad, it attacks, it gets those tokens die to the legend roll. And if you get one of those with a really good ETB or a really good death trigger, it could break the game wide open. And most recently in Battle for Baldur's Gate, we received pretty much the ultimate Myriad card in Legion Loyalty. Creatures you control get Myriad, whereas before the easiest way to give other creatures Myriad was just by including the colorless equipment Blade of Selves. It's one of those abilities that it feels like it has limitless power. I don't think it's quite busted though, because there are only so many ways that you can give your other creatures Myriad. I feel like if Wizards continues to give us support for this ability, it's going to be Myriad already included on a specific creature, not any more ways of giving Myriad, and I think that would be fair. It's still going to be fun with Myriad creatures anyway, but it is dangerously close to being that broken. Next we have Ninjutsu. Maybe the most flavorful ability out of all of these. It makes perfect sense. We're going all the way back to the original Kamigawa. It's received support in Plane Chase, it's received support and a Commander Precon, and most recently with Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. These are ninjas, they're all ninjas. Them having ninjutsu is a flavor win. It's a sneak attack that your opponents are not going to see coming unless they know, hey, this unblockable one-drop is attacking me for a reason. When you build a deck around ninjutsu, you're at least going to surprise them with the specific ninjutsu creature. So that's still a part of the surprise factor. I love seeing that it got support in the newest Kamigawa set. Magic players seem to agree on this one. If something's fun, you want to see more support, and if you get more support, you're going to embrace it. That's why Yuriko is, again, like one of the most played commanders. Satoru Umezawa kind of breaks the trend a little bit. It's not about ninjas with ninjutsu, but rather any creature can get ninjutsu. So we have another instance of a really powerful ability being given to other creatures. It's so crazy, it's chaotic. Next we have Bestow, going back to Theros. It's another Theros ability. This time it's an alternate cost you can pay in order to have your enchantment creature become an aura that's enchanting another creature. This is what I was talking about. It's very similar to what Wizards did with Mutate. I think Mutate was way more successful, but that doesn't mean I don't have a love for Bestow. If I had any recommendation for Wizards, if you're listening, you could ignore all of these other abilities. I think this is the one. Give us more Bestow, because this was so fun to play limited, it was so fun to play standard. We do have Kestra the Cultivator, but as far as card draw engines go, that seems to be all she is. There's not really much going on here. You had to spend 6 mana, only giving a creature +4/+4. We can do a little bit better than that. It was one of those things that really disappointed me when we did return to Theros. There wasn't any Bestow at all. What's great is that if the creature that it's enchanting dies or is removed, the Bestow creature becomes a creature again. So there's that upside there that you don't get with Mutate. If the Mutate creature dies, all parts of the Mutate creature go with it. So that's one of the reasons why I think if we had a little bit more support, other people would recognize how powerful, how fun this ability can be. Next we have Dethrone, coming from the original Conspiracy set. Not Queen Marchesa, but Marchesa the Black Rose. Here you could make an entire deck around Dethrone. It's not an overwhelming ability, but the reason why I love it is that it is designed perfectly for a multiplayer game. I love it when you have abilities that encourage proper threat assessment, and while this isn't always the case, the person with the most life isn't always the ultimate threat, but generally speaking, they tend to be ahead way too far, so you might as well attack them, get the benefit of the Dethrone trigger. Gives your creature a +1/+1 counter. It's one of those abilities where it's less about what it literally does, and more about how it interacts with other cards that can take advantage of it, i.e. Marchesa. We need more payoffs for Dethrone, that's the one thing holding it back, but I love the design. The most recent card we got to bring it back with was Park Heights Maverick from the New Capenna Commander product. But that's it, it's not enough to really help bring back Dethrone. I know we've got the Monarch from Conspiracy 2, but that's more of a keyword action. This is a little bit more direct, and it's a lot easier to forget about the Monarch. Happens all the time. Unless you're constantly marking someone with that token, it could be several turns and someone will be like, oh, you didn't draw off the Monarch, you forgot? Hey, I guess we all forgot too. Dethrone is right there on the card. Every time it attacks, you know you're getting that trigger. I love it, but I am willing to acknowledge it's not that great on its own. It needs a little bit more. The last ability here, the 10th one of my favorites, is Evolve from Gatecrash. Simic are one of my favorite guilds, and Evolve is another flavorful ability. The strong keep getting stronger if they're left uncontested. Probably the most underrated card in green, in my opinion, is Renegade Crassus. Not only does it have Evolve, but it's also going to help your other +1/+1 counter creatures, maybe your other evolved creatures, continue to grow. It's another one that isn't super supported either, so I think there's plenty of potential for us to return to Evolve in the future, because I remember it being even more fun and limited in Standard than in Commander. You do have your commons and uncommons that were clearly meant for limited, but then you get ones like Fathom Mage, where if you have more time to grow those counters, you're going to get a lot of card draw. So that's going to do it for my 10 favorite keyword abilities for Commander. Let me know some of yours, maybe we agree, maybe you have different tastes. Commander Void here signing off, I will see you all next time.